Good morning, Angie. How's it going?
It's the afternoon here, but it's awesome because usually I can't chat to you much because of the time zone.
Right.
So tell me where you are.
Right now, I'm in the Midwest in Illinois, outside of Chicago. Right now, I'm at my friend's house, which is in another city outside of Chicago, big industrial old city called Rockford.
Wow.
Yeah.
My geography for that part of the US is not very good.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, it's, not many people look at the Midwest and say like, wow, I really want to get to know this part of the United States. Usually.
So how long are you there? Because I need a GPS tracker on you most of the time.
Yeah, I'm usually moving around a lot, but right, I've been here for the winter time, which has been really nice to be in one spot. It's actually, the whole world tour for the documentary is coming up, which is really exciting, but I'm like already a little anxious with all the movement.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's overstimulating, but I'm excited. It's good.
And this is home, right? This is where your family is?
Yes, this is where my family is. This is where my parents are originally from.
Okay.
But when they got married and had all their kids, they were outside of the country for 25 years and were in Bolivia for 6 years and then moved to the Dominican Republic. And that's where me and the last 3 kids of the 4 were born and raised.
Okay.
And so I've been here since I was 12 and it's been my home base, but I started moving around and traveling when I was 16.
Okay. So let's take it back to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
So which number in the 4?
I'm number 3.
Okay.
So I was the youngest of 3 girls. And I was the youngest till I was 7 years old. And then
your brother came along.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what do you remember of growing up in the Dominican and what took your parents there first?
My parents, well, when they were in Bolivia, they were serving a community that was displaced from El Altiplano Boliviano.
Okay.
And they were displaced by the government, put into the Bolivian jungle and with like barely any resources. And my parents, after they actually worked for National Geographic in Washington, D.C. after they did their master's degree. My mom studied anthropology and my dad geography, but both of them have always been really interested in community service, and they joined this Mennonite community thing where they like go and live with communities and build longing relationships and help with resources and studying and finding ways that they can help the communities that were displaced integrate into their new environment. So they did that. Yeah. For
what are
years.
The Mennonite communities for people who don't know?
Mennonite communities, from what I understand, are like it's kind of like being an example of living a very simple life.
Right.
They still use some technologies, but it's kind of like the Amish, where minimal electricity and you work with the earth and you understand your surroundings and your environment and know how to work with the land to be able to sustain life.
Wow. And so this is really like regenerative living, which is like, as you know, what we research.
Right. And my
at its essence.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the jungle, they were learning at the same time with the community on how to create a sustainable, like digging up a well and getting jungle sheep instead of altiplano sheep, like a different that could actually survive in that environment. And so they lived I have seen a lot of tapes of their time living there, like VHS tapes
Wow.
of them. Like
Mind-blowing.
they lived in a little tiny hut and dirt floors, not any electricity, an outhouse, bucket
Wait, and they
showers.
had 3 kids here in
No,
Bolivia.
they had my oldest sister in Bolivia.
Okay.
And they were there for 4 years before they had my oldest sister, Aisha. And then she was raised there until she was 2, and then they went to the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, God, that alone, I feel like we could talk about that for like
I
an
know.
hour.
We should talk to my mom and my dad.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to them. Wow.
Yeah.
And then how did that, so then they were displaced. And were they displaced to the Dominican or?
No. So in Bolivia, they were working with a community that was displaced by the government. Yeah.
Okay.
And after Bolivia, they were connected to a community in the Dominican Republic in Santo Domingo, and started their nonprofit organization, which is on educating churches on how to do sustainable missions, but like serving communities and doing it not in the weird white savior type of way, but learning how to build friendships and relationships with the people that you're serving, and doing it like in a sustainable and a way that is filled with integrity.
Okay, wow, there's so much in that. Like,
Yeah.
and you're born into this environment in the Dominican not that long ago, I will say. You baby.
25 years ago.
25 years ago, Alizé comes along and you're born speaking in the household bilingually, like Spanish and English, or?
Yes. So everything outside of that, the way that I learned the English was by speaking it to my parents in the household. And then outside of our house, everything was Spanish. So school, and then a lot of my people, people from our community helped take care of us because my parents traveled a lot. And so bilingual, both at the same time.
Just like our little Sahara is growing up.
Yeah, it's a
English
beautiful thing.
House and French, which she's not speaking a lot yet, but she's definitely understanding both.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what are your memories these first 12 years? I mean, that's your formative years, right? Like 12 is also a very delicate age to move.
Yeah, that was I was very excited because I like new things and I've always loved new things, but the transition was hard. But in the Dominican Republic, my memories growing up, they're very colorful and loud. I grew up in the city in Santo Domingo, so kind of constant noise and music playing in the colmados and the little shops in the street, and lots of community and color. And the weekends we would go to the beach, and just all these memories of being on the shore, playing with my friends, tropical storms. My favorite was going up on the terrace while there were heavy rains, and just soaking it all up. Beautiful weather and skies. And, it's a time that was filled with lots of life and joyousness. In the Dominican Republic, there's this way of existing that prioritizes fun and time with friends and enjoying life, because it's there's a lot of scarcity and chaos in a lot of ways. And so the essential parts of life are really what are prioritized, which I appreciate, having that warmth inside of me and carrying that, you know.
I can see how those formative years started to shape, well, the Alizé that I know now, which is primarily through your artwork, which we'll get to. But you were then going through school at this time as well. Like, were you schooled in the like public education system? Yep.
Yeah. Until third grade, I was in like a Montessori school, and then I went to a public school. Yeah, from fourth to sixth grade.
And then I don't know how it works there. Like in Australia and France and Japan, my three experiences are all very different. But 12 years old in France, you would have gone already to probably, I think, just studying. Yeah, you would have started middle school. And then in Australia, you just have primary and secondary. But that 12 years is this delicate age where you make that jump from primary school to big league. And so you're doing that going back to the States. Had you had experience going back to the States before that?
Yeah, we had visited family during summer months and sometimes during Christmas, but my experience was pretty minimal and kept in the bubble of my family there, which the family that we would stay with, my aunt and uncle and my cousins, they were all homeschooled, and so it felt like this container. I didn't feel yet exposed to American society until I moved there. And then
you're 12, this delicate little angel full of fun and joy and happiness and color and life and music, and you go to Illinois to start high school, college.
It was middle school. So yeah, 7th and 8th grade I went to public school, and it was exciting. I was excited to have a locker for the first time.
Things you see in the movies, the American
movies. I see in the movies, yeah. And then it was an all right time. It's a very small town, so not many kids in the school. But it was, that, like you said, that age is really, it's a tender, vulnerable time where you're just trying to step out of your shell. And it was kind of hard. In middle school, it started out pretty cool. I was taken in by, like the cool kids. But yeah, that preceded a time of a lot of unnecessary kind of middle school drama and things that I wasn't used to, and it brought a certain darkness to my spirit. And so after middle school, I decided to do online school, not go to public school.
Wow, okay.
And I started high school doing it online. And that was, after a period of certain darkness and just being like, who am I? What is, what am I doing here, basically, in this space where I don't feel like I'm growing at all, where I'm not nourishing the things that I love to do, which at that time were performing arts. I was into theater and writing music and singing. And
did you develop those skills and that creative, I guess that juice was there from when you were in the Dominican growing up around all of that?
Yeah, I started theater in the Dominican Republic, and then I always sang a lot. We were, me and my siblings were always performing and singing for our family and making plays. And then when I would visit my cousins, we would make movies together. And so those were the things that interested me. And I just got to a point, I saw both of my sisters did high school online to start learning in English if they wanted to go to college in the US. One of them ended up doing that. But I had seen that was possible. So I was like, Mom, Dad, can you get me out of this weird place called school in the US and like let me do this so that I can focus on the things that truly nourish me.
And this would have been like what, like 10 years ago, kind of?
Yeah.
Now, if you're 25 now, like around 15.
12. Yeah.
And
this
that's
was
like
13, 14 is actually when I started.
right. And then, I mean, all this kind of, I mean, there is hectic shit going on in state schools in the US. I mean, that's my stereotypical analysis coming from the very privileged position of having grown up in Australia, where we don't have things like guns.
Oh my God.
Definitely no metal detectors in schools. I can only imagine that whole culture shock that you would have been going through, even being in a small like community environment and also being away from the sea.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we have Lake Michigan here, which was, and
True.
I live by a river, which I'm a very,
you had water.
I had water, and I'm grateful for that. And it's still something that I find a lot of solace in. But it was like a subconscious culture shock because since I was little, I've been very adaptable to different situations and circumstances. And so I adapted well. It was more just like as I was growing, feeling like I was growing farther away from who I am. And that's when the culture shock set in. I was like, whoa, this changed, who I came as has been completely shifted, which is probably, I mean, it's a necessary thing. And I think at that age, all of us go through some kind of weird transition that wakes us up in some way.
But it's such an interesting thing to contemplate that you were seemingly quite happy with who you were and the community you were around in primary school in the Dominican, and the energy and all the people you're around seem to gel. And then you go and you have this, like you said, this middle school drum, probably the bitchiness and these kind of things that you had an experience. And I mean, I think that's a general thing when we shift from primary school to middle school and we're going through puberty and we start that. But I can imagine that you start to then question that you've become maybe not the best version of yourself when you were quite happy with. You sound like you're someone who is not sure of yourself per se, but content with who you were in the Dominican as a younger child, which is so cool to have that self-awareness at such a young age. And then it's really interesting to see how you've shifted then at such a tender age too, from the community experience and growing up in community and your parents being their entire lives around community to going, I'm going to put myself in a silo at home and study online. Like, tell me about that shift, because that's huge.
Yeah, well, my experience with community was not that wholesome, or at least not the way that, felt like it was a fertile ground for me to grow in middle school. I had great friends and we had great times, but it was just like I was losing myself. And in general, when we moved to the US, there was already a feeling of isolation compared to what we had in the Dominican Republic. And I think it felt very safe for me to remove myself from the idea of community, because at that point, like at the end of middle school, it wasn't feeling very safe for me. And what felt comforting was to be with myself, get to know myself, finish high school as soon as I could so that I can start making art. And I also, at that time, when I started online school, I started nannying for this family that my oldest sister nannied for. And so because I was doing online school, I was able to nanny them. And that was my community. Thinking about it, I did have like a group of my older siblings, my parents when they were around, this family that I was part of, and these little girls that I took care of for 5 years. That was my community, and I think that was a very healing time for me, because I was spending a lot of time with myself. I had this mission of finishing school and working, trying to save up a little bit of money, and then I had this blessing of being around these beautiful children that reconnected me to my innocence, which I had lost in middle school. Getting lost in all the weird, chaotic hierarchy and drama, and being with these girls, it was I'm accepted and I'm loved by these children, and we can play with each other and laugh, and there's just like a reminder of what the essence of life is, which is this tender communion with each other, and simplicity and play. So the isolation was a focused isolation away from, the aspects that were distracting me from what I wanted in life and who I was. And then it was integrated into this little bubble of community with mostly older people at that time. In my teenage years, up until I was 17, I think, I didn't have any friends my age. So everyone that I was friends with were older. The friends of my older sisters, and, sometimes at least 5 to 10 years older than me were the people that I surrounded myself with, or 5 or 10 years younger.
And clearly having this like big impact on how you were able to be so self-aware as a teenager. It feels like that is also influenced by clearly your education from your parents being with their background and what they were doing, and I guess moving around a lot. It sounds like you were having to also grow up a little bit fast to look after yourself in the family unit when your parents went around, and adapt to having, I guess, older siblings take care of you, or other people as well in the community. And then almost like you passing that on in a way to these little girls. And it's just brilliant. I think that there's not many adults who have that level of self-awareness, let alone, a teenage girl going through puberty. So it's quite impressive. But from what I know of you, like, you carry that through to today, and it goes through to your art, which I really want to talk about a lot. You are a phenomenal artist, a very humble artist, and I came to know you through the film, through working together on the film, and then discovered your still photography, which sort of comes before, right? And we'll get to that part. And then, someone will share in the group chat this video of you singing in the chapel. I think Lake had, and it's like, fuck you, your voice, like, is there anything? And then I discover this song and video, like music video you've put out on Spotify from before, and I'm like, is there anything you can't do? So I want to go through a little bit of the artist journey, because that was clearly developing from an early age. And it sounds like you had so much self-awareness about that, because you're like, I'm going to go and just finish the curriculum part of school because I got art to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I was ready to be done so I can just focus. And I wanted to travel too, you know, I wanted to get to know the world to be able to inform the stories that I wanted to tell. But with art, that's always been, like I said, I grew up entertaining my family with my siblings all the time. And I just, you know, I probably in childhood, I really liked the attention and I like to make people smile and laugh. Um, and that just always stuck with me. I started with ballet. That was like my first love in art was dance. And I did ballet for 7 years until I was 11 and started becoming like, I didn't like how strict it was becoming. So I said, Mom, I'm sorry. I want to quit ballet. I want to get into theater now. And so I started doing theater and did that, you know, for a few years, maybe, yeah, actually around 5 years. That was one of the things that I was able to do when I started online school was I started taking acting classes at a place called Second City and was part of a play there
You
in
have
Chicago.
time and you have flexibility and you have
Exactly.
freedom, right?
Exactly.
When you're
Yeah.
outside of the kind of more rigid, which, you know, the public education system serves a purpose and not everyone has the privilege to be able to go and, you know, afford to do these other extracurricular activities and
Yeah.
study online even. Like not everyone even has internet like that.
No.
But you've got your time.
Yeah, I got my time. And then that's a really good point. And I have my parents to thank a lot for it's not like they were swimming in money either. And with all of us, they found a way throughout debt and scarcity. They always found a way to help us with making our dreams a reality. And
Following your curiosities. Yeah.
they're the biggest champion, like the cheerleaders of what we want. And I think that also helped a lot in a development of trust in myself. I'm like, wow, I have a support system. And that's something that I will always be grateful for. So I said, I want to do theater now. Can we do this? And they're like, okay, yeah, we can try that. And I did that for a couple of years. And at the same time, movies had always been an interest of mine. And when I had saved enough money, I remember that one of the first things I got was a GoPro. And I started making little films and editing films around 14.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was my first love in the visual art space. And of course, that also was interplayed with my love for acting and theater. You know, just like being able to create an imaginary world and weave imagery together to tell a story.
And would you say that was driven by the sheer joy that it gave you as a feeling, like as opposed to a specific like political purpose, or it's like this joy of expression was what drove you?
Yeah, it was always the joy of it. I never saw it as I just liked observing the world. I liked seeing it. And at that time too, a big part of why I started with filming was because I was starting a shift from being in the spotlight to wanting to hide and be behind the camera and become more of an observer. And
Is
so
this like at what age? Like
14, 15. Yeah.
That's another age that you start to get a little bit more as a woman, you know, you might start bleeding and start to grow boobies and start to be a little bit self-conscious of the male gaze, walking down the street in Illinois.
Which, although I was already very exposed to that in the Dominican Republic, more than in Illinois. Illinois people are very shy. They're polite. But yeah, there was this man, and I was so excited when I got my period. I really, it was a sacred moment, you know. I was looking forward to it. It was this big initiation moment for me. And it makes you feel wise in some way. You're like, wow, my body, you know, is doing these processes that feel really sacred. And I'm part of that now, you know. But
that's
yeah,
so awesome, because that was not my experience at all.
I know it's not the experience of many people, and it makes me
I don't even remember. I only just remember that mine came like a little bit later, around maybe 16 or something, and that they were just so heavy. And I went to this private school, and our uniform was green, and in the summer it was a nightmare because it was like a light green checkered, like thin cotton uniform, and I used to have to wear, like, all us girls would wear bike pants underneath, and then in winter it was like a heavy kilt with stockings, and when I had my period I would have to wear 2 pairs of stockings and bike pants, because I would just, and I have this horrible memory of my year 11 or 12, like the final years of school, Japanese exam, where I was bleeding so heavy, like I knew I was like bleeding through, and I just wrapped up the exam and left. Like I had to go, because I had to go to the toilet and deal with it, and get in my car and go home and cry.
That's also this part of the initiation. It's like,
yeah, I didn't see it as anything fucking amazing. I was like, this sucks. This sucks to be a woman, and being a surfer too. Like, then have to, you know, discover how the tampons and everything as being a surfer, because I didn't want to like be out of the water. But I love that you had a way more kind of gentle, beautiful, and aware initiation than I did. And
yes,
that's something I hope for my daughter as well.
I'm sure she will. Yeah, you've got that down. You will guide her well. You have been guiding her well.
She will have thick bike pants just in case.
Just tell her, don't let it stop you. Don't let it stop you.
So you're coming of age, and you're starting to soften on the attention, Alizé, and step to this observer, Alizé.
Exactly. Yeah, and also just going way more internal, and other than being
hey kitty, hi kitty,
being obsessed with like my own image or how I'm coming across. It's more just like, what is my surrounding world teaching me right now in this moment, and what does it teach me about myself? And a lot of it was just very inward. And
do you think that you have more awareness of this in retrospect, or are you really like, this is really how you're seeing the world at this time? Like, was there more confusion about I guess putting words on what was happening to you and why you were feeling these ways? Do you see that that's more clear now in retrospect? Do you recall like, no, I was fucking aware that this is how I was feeling at that time?
I think there's more clarity about it now. I was just piecing things together and doing the things that made me feel like I was expanding and learning. So
you were following your intuition quite a bit then.
Yes. Yeah. And then words, being able to vocalize what I was observing and feeling within myself was something that came through writing songs and music. And it came out in a very abstract way. And I still feel like I'm learning how to use my words to articulate how I
did the music come naturally? Like playing instruments and writing and
composing? Writing and singing came naturally. The instruments, I have very simple knowledge just to be able to write and sing to. But yeah, I would say that it's like in my family, there's a lot of music and musicians and people that are in there. So it did come naturally. And so, yeah, all of that was happening in this really nice synergy of just there. I was going inward and quietly just exploring my imagination and my perspective on the world. And the tools that helped me with that were the camera and songs.
And how were you seeing the world? How was this impacting your view of the world at that time?
It was, I guess, how it's always been. It just, which is, I've always had a very in awe way of looking at the world since I was a little kid. And so I don't think my perspective of the world changed. It was my understanding of how it actually sat like in my being was a thing that changed and clarified. So it was like, oh wow, and again with being surrounded by children and innocence and kids that are experiencing the world anew, I was like, man, this has just always been within me, this like childlike awe of what's going on around me, and the way that it going inward made me deepen that understanding was like just seeing everything as being a miracle and very everything, no matter how simple a moment can be, that it can be profound and carry meaning. And then around 15, 16, that's when I started seeing that it could, film could have an impact on. So I started becoming a little bit more of like a little activist and became vegan and was like, I'm going to live a life of zero waste, no plastic, because that was something that I grew up seeing in the Dominican Republic all the time, was just plastic everywhere, no infrastructure to be able to manage waste. And so that was, there was this rebel side of me, little activist side, that was like, I had to make a difference here, which that was, that period of time in someone's life usually is a stripping with rebellion and just the system is fucked and I hate it. And I don't want to be part of it.
Yeah, it's the anarchy expression, right? Like, which feels like it may have then taken your art to a new level.
Yes, yeah. And with music, I started at 16 is when I did my first project, where I went to Peru and was part of this pilgrimage with 2 indigenous grandmothers that were holding ceremonies and like prayer circles and teaching us about indigenous traditions in Peru. And then also one of them was from Canada.
Were you in the Andes?
We started in Urubamba.
Yeah.
And then went down to Lake Titicaca. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And so that, that was, it was a trade project. So I went there, I bought my ticket, was able to do the pilgrimage, and I documented it. And that was the first time where I was like, oh, wow, I can I can tell actual stories of people and learn and grow at the same time. And it felt really expansive. And that, I think that was the pinnacle of that film can be a very powerful tool. And not that it was a powerful tool to me at that time. It's not like, you know, I made a huge documentary about this pilgrimage or anything, but I learned that there is something sacred about that I was able to have that experience.
And not just in the documenting of the film and then sharing that, but actually my argument would be in the process of capturing those stories through the lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your learning,
Mm-hmm.
which is creative practice research that I'm going to eventually convince you to study.
Yes.
Which is what I do. But yeah, this is like autoethnography in action and creative practice research, because it's not just, you know, go shoot. I mean, a lot of people do this, by the way, go shoot, share, you know, and not necessarily having these huge shifts internally. But again, I just circle back to your self-awareness is profound for your age, even at that time, and for your first kind of like project, to just be really aware of what's happening to you as a person and how the process of making this is and interacting with these people. And in the landscape as well, you sound like you were really in relation in the right way, which no doubt comes out through your work. I mean, it does. It absolutely does. I haven't seen that, but I've seen, you know, your more recent stuff, and I can vouch for it.
Well, thank you.
Was this shot on a GoPro still, or had you
No,
upgraded?
I had upgraded at this point. This was shot, I think it was either the Panasonic GH2 that our family friend, who when I was 15 lended me my first DSLR, and I started shooting footage with a DSLR at 15. And you know what? I think at that point I shot with that for a year, and then I had saved up money to buy a GH4, Panasonic GH4, and yeah, shot it all on that. I've always been a very simple gal in terms of gear, and
you're self-teaching this shit at the same time, right? Like you're just figuring out how to use the tools.
Yeah.
How long were you in Peru?
I was there for a month.
Wow. And my presumption is that you shot a lot of content, and then you had to work with it.
Yeah, which it was like a small video, and my process back then was very simple. It was choose a song and visually with rhythm cut scenes together so that they flow and show like a visual. There's no voiceover, there's nothing. It's just music and imagery. So yeah, very simple, but at the time it was this stage of learning a lot and finding my own rhythm with it.
And you were saying one of the women was Canadian, and it sounded like that opened the door to something else.
Something else?
Like before, you were saying that you did this trip, and one of the women, I think, was Peruvian, right? And then the other was Canadian. Did that lead you to go like on your next trip, or?
No, well, actually, what led me was one of the other women that was there with their daughter who lived in Indonesia, who was Australian, actually. And they lived in Indonesia. That led me to my next.
Yeah.
That led me on to the next adventure, which was the next year in Indonesia. And then I went to Indonesia, the Philippines, and captured another journey with two other women. This is funny. This is like a weird full circle moment. One of the friends that I met in Indonesia when I was staying with these women that I had met in Peru, she was doing an expedition and climbing this non-active volcano, Mount Rinjani, in the island of Lombok.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was now 17, and I captured that, and it was another trade situation where I was able to do it, capture it all, and then made another video. And then at that point, I was like, wow, okay, this is something that I really enjoy. It was a 3-day trek. I had a UTI at the moment. It was like a really big discomfort moment where I'm like peeing my pants going straight up this mountain for 12 hours. And one of those moments where I was just like, I'm just going to truck through this. This is beautiful. I don't care if I'm peeing my pants.
Male cinematographers clearly don't have to worry about the same shit that we do they?
No, but it makes it all the more interesting. So I would say like every single thing I've done has led to another thing, and every connection I've ever made has led to more connections, and that happened very naturally. And I've learned a lot, and some led me through paths I didn't want to take, and some led me through really great paths that, and
yeah,
both.
I think it's important to like acknowledge that life is not all roses, like
Right.
the challenges are along the way. You just have a very positive outlook on life, and you seem to take the challenges as part of your growth. And had you finished school by this point? Like, did you finish school early because you were doing it online?
Yes.
And so now you're like completely free.
Yeah, I finished at 15. So I finished high school in 2 years. And yeah, so at 15 I finished, kept nannying.
That was your income. That was your bread and butter. While you were building your portfolio and your technique and your style and your way of looking at the world.
Exactly.
Your ontology. So I kind of want to fast forward a bit to where you start shooting still photography in the style. First of all, describe the style that you are known for today and when that came about. Like, when was this shift sort of away from this kind of like very fluid, journey-esque, just following the next serendipitous, opportunity to shoot something with video, to having like a very distinct portfolio now of still images and self-portraiture?
Yeah, that would be considered my style now with still photography, because at first I wanted to challenge myself with capturing a story with one frame, and that's how I started with photography at 16. And a lot of it was just portraiture work and documentary style photography. And then around 17, I started taking self-portraits very loosely. And then during the pandemic in 2020, that's when I started going real deep with the whole self-portraiture thing. And that's where I started molding this aesthetic that I have now, which is figurative art. It's very dreamy, dreamscape like where colors are vibrant yet a little bit muted, and the human body is intertwined with its surroundings, whether it be nature or an abandoned house or a crowded room of junk. It's I think you would call it figurative, since it has to do a lot with the human body. And yeah, that started developing during the pandemic. And then I had a lot of influences from artists around me and artists that I was looking at that worked with the body in ways that inspired me a lot.
What made you want to work with the body?
A desire within myself to accept my own body, my own flesh and bones, because I was dealing with a lot of self-esteem, like anyone does around that age, 16, 17, dealing with a lot of self-image issues and becoming a little bit defiant on this construct of what beauty is supposed to be in the modern world, and hating that I hated my own body because of the things that I was intaking from the outside world and society.
I like how before you were framing yourself as this, like, going through this like activist phase where you're wanting to do these like docos, and I mean, then you're doing this very individualistic work because you're working with your own body and you're going, but at the same time, like, it's so political too, and it's so cool because you just found a different way to do your activism and like have a very personal experience through that. But at the same time, like, there's no doubt that that work is having a huge impact on girls and women around the world. Were you sharing it at this point as well? Like, were you starting to get known, or did you have a website? Like, how was your work getting out there, and were you making an income from it yet?
No, with the whole self-portraiture stuff, that was like, it felt like a journaling process for me. I did share some of it, but the way that I was receiving work was from word of mouth and filmmaking. That was like my main income stream. And
right, so still doing these little like kind of
little short
poetic like docos. Yeah, not necessarily like the narrative deep storytelling style, but this.
Yeah, I started doing, like, I was doing promotional videos for artists and people that had their own thing going on, their own businesses, or wanted to tell their story. I also helped with doing some short format storytelling videos for Black Bean Productions and the African continent, which was a lot more documentary style. So I was like, I did a little bit of everything. And in terms of with the whole self-portraiture thing, that deepened when I was learning about that was deepening, during the pandemic. And I think after that is where I started sharing a little bit more. I had more time on my hands. I wasn't able to shoot anybody else. And it just started becoming this play, like a playground for me to play with colors. And
such a good word for it, because that's when you look at your portfolio as, I guess, as a wall, like as a grid on Instagram or on your website, it does look like a playground. I think like that's a really good way of, like, you provide this environment, which I would argue a playground is a great word for, imagination. Like, because it's so profound because your imagination has obviously gone to wherever it's gone, and you've given it the security and safety, and you've nourished it to be able to create these still images, and then it's shared, and then you're sharing it with other human beings who are all seeing it in different ways, and that sparks their imagination. And I think that a playground is like that kind of place, right? Every kid that goes to a playground is going to kind of approach it differently and role play something different and share it together in a different way. How much of your work, of the process of imagination, is not only in like it, I cannot like overemphasize how much work goes into one shot. Like, you're thinking about it, you're setting it up, then you're taking the image, but the post-production of that too is a lot, right?
Yeah, but it's fun. It's fun. You get to play around with colors. You get to make the world look exactly how you want it to. And so, yeah, the playground aspect, it's like, I think I haven't for a while because I've been lovingly focused on the documentary. I've not entered into this world of self-portraiture. So when I speak about it, it feels like a distant lifetime.
Oh, that's interesting.
But when I go back to it, I think it was a combination of finding innocence and grief and grieving like a certain relationship that I had with myself that was now changing as I was growing up, and still finding beauty in the sadness and in all the emotions that I was experiencing through like hard moments in my life, which photography was my safe haven. It was a quiet moment for myself where I felt truly present with the place that called to me to be like, I want to take a picture here. This feels good. I'm gonna sit with this space and fully be present and feel my emotions and let myself be fully integrated into this a place that I'm creating for myself. And
how do you walk through the world, like just down the street even and around the corner, without everything jumping out at you and going like, how do you decipher? How do you say, I need to keep walking because I've got to go to this place, versus like, oh shit, here comes my ideas, like, how do you, is there an on and off for your imagination? Or is there a like, okay, put it in the file for later, I've got my notebook, or I'll take a recce shot and I'll get back to that because I have to be at this place at 3:00. I mean, we'll talk about the movie and the no 3:00, but I mean, we know that in the real world, right? Like in this, well, which is not necessarily real, but in this fabricated capitalistic world, we're going to be somewhere and keep these appointments, and you've got a niece and you've got to show up and look after your niece at this time. You can't be late. You can't just stop at this amazing abandoned, cottage that you've seen and start processing it. How do you keep a lid on that?
I don't keep a lid on it. It's always in the back of my mind. I'm always like, wow, that's a really pretty corner of that house, or a patch. I like that hole in the ground, or
yeah, holes are a thing for you.
I definitely, it's never off. I'm always looking at the world as like, wow, how would I capture this? And I don't, just because I'm sick of feeling guilty for not capturing every single thing that catches my eye, I'll either put it in the back burner and I'm like, yeah, put it in a folder, remember it for later. I will come back to it. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And the times that I can't, I just let it go and appreciate the thought that I had with this space or that image that I saw in that moment.
I love that non-attachment. And like at the end of the day, you know, not everything needs to be art. Like it can be life.
Yeah. And then also I have, like you were saying, I have my family, I have my niece, I have the biggest priority for me in my life is that I show up for my community and my family, and that comes first. So it's not like I'm, I would never say no to being there for my family over being like, I really gotta work on my art and my art career. And that's just not who I am. And it doesn't feel, it's just not aligned with how I want to live my life.
Let's talk about you saying yes to things then. I think that's a really cool segue into how you came to document the Women in the Wind voyage. You get a call from Kiana.
I got a WhatsApp message.
A WhatsApp message. Can you be here in 2 weeks? Yes.
She said, yeah. She said in a couple months, maybe this summer, want to cross the Atlantic. And, you know, at that point, I met her once at the boatyard, and we had been following each other on Instagram for a while before that too.
Yep. Okay.
And when I met her, I secretly was like, dang, I would love to go on a little adventure with this girl. Like,
she's a badass.
She's amazing. She's a badass. She's cute, everything. And so it was like this thought that had crossed my mind, and I was like, this is cool. Then I forget about it. 6 months later, she shoots me a message, and it was all happening very quick, but I say yes to anything that makes me feel an initial like zing. And that made me zing. And I was like, yeah, I want to do that. Tell me.
Which
and
is
it's like
so crazy because you saw that boat like in pieces in the boatyard. You've got no sailing experience. You're like, she's a badass. She's cute. I'm sure she knows what she's doing. Yeah, the Atlantic, cool. That's just like a big puddle.
Yeah, I mean,
bigger than the lakes, but hey.
It was a little terrifying. Like, definitely I had these thoughts of, wow, this is super unknown and very scary, but that's the thing that attracts me. And so it was an instant yes. And it's one of those things where I say, okay, at the end of my life, am I going to be happy if I would have said no to this? And probably I would have been like, why didn't you just try it out? No matter if it's a big, scary thing. This is what life is for, is
so
to
you fly down to Wilmington. And the boat's back in the water by the time you get there.
Yeah, the girls had sailed it from the boatyard in St. Augustine to Wilmington late May, and I met them in June, beginning of June of 2022. Started integrating into boat life, getting used to
this amazing shot that I was talking with Laker about in our conversation recently, and it's of you, and you're like on the deck, and you kind of just like got your hands by your side, and you're just like looking around. Can you know, the presumption of me as the viewer of that scene is like, you're like, what the fuck? What am I doing? What have I got myself into? Like, this thing is floating. Because of the way that scene comes in the movie, like we've just come out of the boatyard and this thing like literally has had surgery and has been stitched back together. And now it's got to traverse you across like a mass expanse of water known for being a rugged, you know, part of ocean to cross. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck were you feeling?
I, I got there. The biggest thing in the initial 3 weeks, month that I was getting used to the boat and where everything was, and just, having to navigate life in small quarters with two other women. I was just getting to know these two women too, because I only met Lerke once before that. And Kiana, I had only met twice. So now I'm getting to know these women for the first time. And for me, it wasn't like, I wasn't like, what the fuck? Am I really doing this? It was more just like, what?
What is this world?
Yeah, what is this? Like, people actually live floating in the water, and she's got everything she needs. And I'm just looking around like, wow, this is, again, kind of in awe. And the thing that got me most, just like, oh, what the fuck, what am I doing, is the amount of time that it took to wait for, like, how dependent you are on the elements. And that was the thing that got me the most, like, what am I doing here? I could be with my
you're
family.
used to like controlling everything.
And go,
like,
go. Yeah.
Your schedule, you're busy, you're like precise, you're controlling lights and all of this part of your work in your life. And then you get to this world, this microcosm of Maranoka, and you're like, when are we going? What's going on?
We were supposed to leave. Yeah, we were supposed to leave yesterday. And here we are 3 weeks later, and I'm like, this is never going to happen. And then it, obviously it eventually did. But I remember feeling like, man, okay, this is a big lesson. I got to learn how to sit my ass down and just trust. I'm literally not in control here. And that was one of the biggest lessons for sure, is just you have to respect that the elements have power over you. And there's something so beautiful about that.
Especially because your work is, this, I guess, exploration of the human body and the human being in relationship with its environment. And like, you've been capturing these particularly credible images, telling these stories about that. And then you're like really in it yourself, without, I mean, you have the camera there, but there's obviously so many moments where you're just sitting in it and you have to contemplate how that relationship really works in the intense. I guess it's so much more intensified when you're on a boat and you're crossing an ocean like that, and also when you're obviously going through the storms. So it feels like you're really kind of like, what you thought you knew is like knocked out of you, and you're like, shit, I gotta really sit in this uncomfortable space of nothingness,
right,
or something's gonna happen. And then the voyage starts, right, and it's like just a little gentle puff. It's not like you're just, hey, here we go, and here's the big waves and the storm. Like, that shit took, it was a retreat for the first part.
Yeah, which, I mean, in that too, there was this little bit of preparation. I know that we probably could have prepared a lot more, but there was this sense of like, okay, because I like to be productive and I like to do things, there was a part of me like, okay, sit in this. You're not in control here, but what can you control? And that was like, organize the bins that Kiana Lerke wanted me to organize, and organize my own space. And if I see something cool, I'm going to go and take some pictures, and I'm going to make a little bit of art, and I'm just going to soothe myself and see how I can use my time. And surrender to that. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is happening. And then you lose phone service, and you're like, okay,
Shit
This
is
is the
real.
only thing that exists right now for me. And bye-bye to my family, bye to everyone that I'm in communication with.
And then you get seasick.
And then I get seasick, which I knew that I got seasick from going from Wilmington to Beaufort. I got seasick then, which was only a day, 2 days, one night. So I already knew that would happen, but I was hoping that it would just be like, okay, a few days.
Everyone says it's like a few days and it passes.
Right. And then
Yours was a little longer.
Mine was a little bit longer. And it, you know, when I look back on it, it was exactly how it was supposed to be, because it just, my body had never been as tired as it was in those moments of seasickness. I rested a lot. I had to just I couldn't be as productive as I wanted to, especially in those first few days when my body was adjusting to the fatigue and the weakness. It was just like, oh, okay, I have to transition. This is a big transition for me. This is the first time I'm doing this, and this seasickness is forcing me to like film not that much in those first few days and actually just land where you are and realize what the fuck is going on, which is you're in the middle of the ocean now.
But then you realize like this seasickness isn't going away and the voyages day after day is passing and you got a documentary to make. Were you starting to then be concerned, obviously, for your health, but also for your responsibility because you'd, taken this, you'd agreed and the girls were counting on you. Did you feel that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's anxiety for sure of like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Which sure enough, I mean, even those first days where it was the thick of it, and my body's just getting used to it, I was still filming. I still did my job and I didn't let it stop me, but it was like a different process that I was not used to before. And I think the whole time there was this sense of like, we don't know what the story is gonna really be about. So I was always on the edge of like observing and knowing or listening to, okay, what here do I have to, what is calling me to be captured right now? What are the moments that feel like they're like, okay, this is a moment where we want to feel that the camera wants to observe, because the camera was its own entity on that trip. And eventually I got used to the fatigue and the throwing up and all of that. Our bodies are amazing and adaptable. I was never worried about the seasickness because I didn't know it could be like a fatal thing, that you could die from not retaining water. I was like, you just puke and you feel tired, so it's fine.
Eventually you gotta eat and keep it down though.
Yeah.
Or your body's gonna shut down.
Exactly. But that was the least of my worries. I was like, I don't,
there's actually these amazing morning sickness pills that you probably would have benefited from. I get chronic morning sickness, but they make you super tired, but it's like you just sleep it off.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can't shoot a documentary.
Right. When you're sleeping. Exactly.
You can't operate machinery.
No. And yeah, eventually it was just like, I say, you're here for one thing, and that is to do the thing that you love most and document this. And it never, even though there was moments where it was like, okay, this doesn't feel like it needs to be captured again, that thing of like, not everything needs to be shared, not everything needs to be packaged into a piece of art or
still shot a lot.
I shot the shit out of that.
I'm kind of glad you got sick because I would be horrified at how much there was to edit had you not had anything holding you back.
Yeah. It would have been a little overkill, I think, because it's, you
That's
also have
a
to
lesson
be.
that you learn though, as the more and more that you do this work, you learn to decipher what's integral to the story, what might be good to have, and then what you need to let go of and not be
Exactly.
attached to, because you can't document everything.
Right. Which I learned so much in that voyage is still informing the way that I see, like, okay, this is the time that I gotta have my camera rolling, and
Yeah.
this is not like, there's also this back behind the scenes part where you got to be fully immersed without any distraction of a camera. You have to feel what this is like. You have to get to know people without the camera, um, and that's really sacred to it, and it informs the times that you are shooting. Which then that was also a little bit limited with the amount of hard drive space I had too. So I only have one hard drive, and things have to be intentional. I don't have the luxury of having a studio and all this space. There were moments that I had to just calm down and say, okay, when moments did happen and I wasn't able to capture because it's happened so suddenly, and that I had to make peace with, like, oh, that was just for us. That was just for us. And that's very beautiful too.
And that's so important in this current age of iPhones and TikTok and YouTube, where everyone is, and I'm so guilty of it too, and capturing everything. I mean, I've become so much more conscious of it in the past year because my daughter is nearly 2, and everyone around her has a phone, and everyone wants to also capture her, through this phone. And then what are we teaching her, with this? And I remember, because the boys are 15 and 13 now, like, I was living in Japan when Ryder was a baby, and I just had like a little flip phone with I don't even think it had a camera. So I had a Ricoh and a Nikon DSLR. My ex-husband's a photographer. We have beautiful, beautiful photographs of his childhood and his birth and my pregnancy and things like that, because they were more intentional without the iPhone. And then Hunter comes along and you've got an iPhone, and you start to have less of these more artistic and kind of like poignant memory photographs. And now it's more of like a lot. And now with Sarah, it's like there's just, between her and the dog, there's way too many photos and videos, and it bothers me, and I want to stop it. And I think, we're living in this period of time of saturation, and not just in terms of the content that's out there, but just like you said, like, you only had one hard drive. I think people forget that all of this content has to be stored somewhere. That storage space requires energy to power it. It requires materials that are extracted from the earth to hold our stuff.
Yes, which sends me into a spiral a lot of the time, where I'm just like, this thing that I love doesn't come for free. There's a cost to this. And it makes me want to be a lot more intentional of the amount of time, because then also even with Women in the Wind being, a lot of it being powered by social media and this digital community, there's an inner
contradiction, isn't it?
Yeah. And I've noticed myself, like, wow, there is an essence about this trip that is very it's distant from the world that we're living in now, because that was the least of our worries. Was social media, was
it didn't exist. I mean,
no.
Laka and I talked about this. A lot of people don't realize that you guys had a couple thousand on social media. Like that came later.
After the fact.
That came after the fact. So you weren't worrying about it, and it was never about that. The greatest irony is that thanks to the social media virality, this movie now gets to be shared in physical community with people in places in the world that I'm like, y'all have sailboats there? Oh no. And oh, you're a group of rock climbers. Oh, cool. And you want to screen Women in the Wind. And because I'm going through all the applications, like personally, of all these screenings and reading the reasons why people go to these screenings. And it's honestly fucking mind-blowing the places this film is going in physical community, like people gathering together in groups as small as 10 and big as 1,500 people to watch this thing.
It's not real to me still. I don't.
But the irony is that social media enabled that.
Right.
And yeah, that's, I think, in a conflict we all have with it. That we're trying to make peace with, and trying to use that social media in a really, I don't know, the best way that we can. With a level of consciousness and appreciation and gratitude, but also appreciating that, there's a darker side to that as well.
Yes, exactly. And you have to handle it. I mean, right now, because we're in the thick of it, there's not much of a moderation you can take with it, because that's just what this stage of the process entails, and you got to give yourself to that. But I think, like I couldn't do this the majority of my life.
Oh no, it's not healthy.
That's why I think there's this journey to it where you just kind of got to trust how it's unfolding naturally, and be really aware of how you want to use this tool, because it's a beautiful tool. Social media is the reason why I've done all the projects that I've done, basically.
Yeah, you're of that generation where, I'm 42, you're 25. So my coming of age would have been very different from yours in terms of the internet space. Like, I think we didn't even get internet at home until I was at uni, or just before uni, or after I went to uni, and I'd already moved out by then. Like, you had to use the internet at uni or a library. Started to get it on the phone. I lived in Japan in my 20s, and that, from being in South Australia where I grew up to then going to Japan where everything felt so tech advanced, that blew my mind. Like, oh, you can do this stuff on your phone, and we didn't have phones that could do that. This is still way before iPhones. In Japan, there was a blogging, actually they had like a community. It was a social media called Mixi. And so that was like the first kind of social media around the time of MySpace, which was music, I go back to the MySpace days and MSN Messenger. But yeah, your generation, literally grew up on this shit. Yeah. And so, I find it really, really fascinating. I have a new book I have to read called The Space of the World, which kind of looks at what we got wrong with social media, but how we can get it right. So we'll have to have another conversation in the future. Please. I'm going to interview the author. I'm excited about that. Wow. But going back to the movie, and now that it's coming out into this global community, I just want to go back to the moments when it's just the three of you and Marinoka, and you've gone through these incredibly challenging storms and difficult periods, and you're still sick and you're still filming this movie. I want to sort of know about that transformation of you as a person, because obviously this transforms you as an artist as well. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give away too much of what's actually in the movie and what you share there as well. We'll save that so people can experience it for themselves. But how much did that trip change you?
Shit. Well, all I can say is I'll never be the same again, for sure. I think, yeah, there's just like and especially since we're talking about this digital age, and the majority of my life I've grown up in this digital age where there's constant information. It was the first time I was disconnected from all of that and disconnected from my family and friends. I had never been, like, in my adult life, I think maybe, yeah, I experienced no internet in my very young childhood years. And then we got a computer, you know.
Wow.
And then after that, it's
yeah,
like,
you don't know the life of traveling and having to find and pay for
no,
internet cafes. You're just like constantly connected.
exactly. And so
Mind
that,
blowing.
I think for me, it was like, damn, what am I doing with my life when I'm just like, what was I doing all those years with just like this being the center
Constantly
and
connected.
constant noise, constant information. And in that sense, I didn't experience that kind of quality time with myself in all of my adult life. And the silence and the space for contemplation and yeah, just like you have to move through uncomfortable things, but you are so capable of doing that. And after that, I think I prioritize, I try to, and it's obviously a journey in this modern day world, but trying to prioritize the essential things of life that are outside of this little screen.
Is there a conflict for you with having had this experience and documenting it and now sharing it, and so many people who also don't have the access to go sailing and go on a voyage like this, and particularly on a boat like this? The boat is very special in its minimalism and how that strips everything away as well with the disconnection. You know, it's not just like you're disconnected from the internet and you've got like this luxury bathroom like some boats have. Like,
yeah,
this is minimalism at its best on the water. So you've documented all of this and you're sharing it, and thousands of people are going to have a pretty immersive experience. And I would argue an embodied experience watching this, that it will impact them. Is there also like a little piece of you who wants to keep it, you know, for yourself? Like, would you like to do this trip again, or a similar trip without any technology at all, like all the cameras gone, and just go and experience it without the documentation of it for you yourself?
all right, well, part of me, I feel really happy and content with the fact that people that, yeah, like you said, wouldn't have the experience or don't have it available to them to go sailing and have this experience. That makes me really happy and joyful to be able to provide that and share that, and finally getting to the stage of the documentary where it can belong to the world. With that, there is an inner conflict with it also representing a side, just one side of me. And I'm sure that other girls too, it does feel very vulnerable, and it's not our wholeness as individuals. So there's a fear of like this coming out, and then feeling like there's a implanted image of who we are forever, you know, like that. It's just who we are. There's that aspect of it where it's like there's so much more to it, and but you know, it is what it is, and it's beautiful nonetheless. And then with the desire to have a trip where, you know, the purpose of it is not documenting it at all, or I feel like I have mini journeys with myself in the most mundane situations where I'm like, this is sacred, this is just mine. But it's hard for me to imagine having a huge journey and not wanting to document it with my camera, but not necessarily wanting to document it to share with others. More just because it's something, it's a tool that deepens my presence in any space that I'm in. It's something that I have fun with. I like observing through the camera. I like composing stuff visually. But it is, yeah, it's a vulnerable thing. Art is vulnerable, and it makes, you know, I have a hard time being like, yeah, this is, you know, what I want to do for the rest of my life is share this very vulnerable side of me all the time. Like, I do want to keep things to myself. And and there's this other existential part of me is just like, you know, fuck any of it, and the whole digital presence or online presence, and everyone just go out and live your beautiful life and never look at a phone screen again, you know, and be present with the people that you love and with yourself. And but that's just, you know, it's not the reality right now. And again, you got to look at the positive side of that. We have been contacted by many young women and people that are inspired, and it plants a seed within them to go out and live and experience.
And the reality, we know each other because of that little cube.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I'm great. That's
crazy.
Such a gift too. There's like so many positive sides of creating a film and documenting an experience and sharing
the digital space.
Exactly.
Like this podcast, which I never wanted it to be called a podcast, because I think I have just this idea that that's something that needs to be branded and you need to come up with a schedule and it needs to be, and that I never wanted that. This came about after really, I mean, many years of being in isolation in the southwest of France. And this year, with the start of our boat build, you know, being like, I'm manifesting community. And at that time of starting to manifest that, meeting you guys and working on this film, which really felt like the beginning of this sort of expansion into community. And having been down on Spirit of Gaia with Hanukkah and living on that boat, and you've got this big, you know, the Polynesian voyaging canoes have the big open deck, as Marinoka does, and you have the fire pit in the middle. And then like all the other people, whether they're locals from the shore or they're from other boats, then came together, and you're having these really, really wholesome conversations around the fire pit. And there's elements of, you're not burning a fire as you're going across the Atlantic, but you can see those moments of community where these particular style of boats and their deck enables this place of gathering. So that's kind of where this came about. Like, that's the setting was like, let's do this digitally. And it's a privilege to be able to do it digitally. And then in the future, we'll have that real deck and we'll be able to do that. But just to build relation. And I think that's what the beautiful thing about the internet is this ability to kind of build relationship diagonally outside of your immediate kinship circles of your family. We can go out diagonally and talk to other people, and that's how we make meaning. And I think really that, you know, I'm really working with this idea of creativity being inseparable of life.
Mhm.
And that art can be how I use my camera, or how I write, as a writer, or how I give notes to change the edit of a documentary, or how I parent, how I surf, how I sail, everything is how I make meaning of the world. And so for that, like, I really feel like you are a living embodiment of how, your art and your life are just completely inseparable.
Mm.
And you're blessed to have really come into that, I think, at a young age. And it's just interesting, that self-awareness and that ability you had to do that despite growing up in this, attention era of social
Mhm.
media. You've managed it really, really fucking well. Well
Well,
done.
thanks.
Kudos to
Yeah.
you. You're amazing, and I love you. And I'm so excited to have you here in person
I
in
can't wait.
4 weeks today, I think. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, oh my God, it's 4 weeks today. You're going to be here. We're going to be drinking champagne and watching the sunset.
Damn, I'm so excited. That's
Oh,
what it's
man.
all about. This is why we've been working for 3 years on this thing.
Oh,
It's
God.
just, and that's beautiful. That is sacred. I'm grateful beyond words for, how this has shaped my soul and the beautiful connections. Like, we are so lucky to have you and be connected with you and form a friendship with you. And and I can't wait to meet everyone else that's been interested in this little thing we've been doing.
It's so cool. You've got like just so many people that you've touched, like through the sharing of some of the imagery, really, and the video and the storytelling of the voyage. And it's really just got the attention of 250,000 plus people. It's phenomenal. And it's kind of scary to think that these people are, you're going to be all together soon. And I don't know how overwhelming that's going to be. I'm just coming out of my shell into community again after all those years, because I had, back-to-back miscarriages and a lot of this kind of internal wintering going through sickness. Because people are like, "You going to Paris?" And I'm like, "I'm not going. They're going to Paris. Like, you'll see them there. I am staying here. I will do the Brittany shows. Are you going to the Southwest? Nope, I'm staying here." Because that's going to be a lot of people.
It's gonna be a lot. And we're just coming into spring now, and I've really enjoyed the winter season, and in general moving with the seasons of the year. And it's just, it makes sense. The spring is here.
The wildflowers are starting to bloom in Brittany.
Yes.
Paris is always a little colder. It gets quite cold there, and I think the Parisians are starting to get some of this warmer weather too, and they'll start to be out. The first show is sold out. All of Wilmington is sold out now, I think. It's just awesome. Alizé, I absolutely cannot wait to see you in person, and I'm so grateful to sit and actually get the time where we can just like talk about you and your art and your life and how you see the world. I think you're a huge inspiration, and I'm so thankful that you came and had a chat with me around our imaginary fire pit.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the fire with me and listening to me yap for
I love it.
Time. Yeah, you're amazing.
We're gonna have a part 2 after the film. What next?
Yes,
What's next?
exactly. We will. It'll be a constant relationship throughout the years. That's what it's all about. We're here for a long time, long run.
Thank you so much, girl. I love talking with you, and I can't wait to see you in a few weeks.
Yes. Have a beautiful rest of your afternoon.
And I'm going to go have a glass of rosé before all the children come home.
Very good. Enjoy yourself. You're beautiful and amazing.
You too. Love you lots. Busy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.